really appreciate it. And good afternoon, Lemonheads. I think I mentioned I'm Braeden Anderson. I'm a partner at Gesmer Updegrove in Boston. The most of my work sits at the intersection of kind of traditional finance, regulation, and emerging technology, and that generally means high stakes, fast moving facts, intense scrutiny from either the government or regulators and reputational consequences for companies that are very real. And so with that kind of background, I wanted today to talk to you all about something that sounds like marketing, but I'm going to approach this more like an enforcement action or an investigation, right? Where, first I'm going to show you the evidence, then I'm going to show you the system, show you the controls, and then show the ROI and kind of the conclusion and the outcome as a result of that process. Because what I've learned in building my own platform, is that if your firm is not intentionally building digital capital, then you're leaving future revenue, future recruiting strength, and future resilience on the table as the world continues to move forward. There's mention of AI by Nick to start the program. The world is changing, and the way that clients find their lawyer is changing. But the good thing is that there, with a couple caveats and a couple upgrades and enhancements, the general mission of creating digital content, mapping that in a helpful way that's going to be detected properly by search engines, that tends to map pretty neatly to the new AI environment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think the big hook, right, is, where does trust come from now today in today's environment, right? When a high value client or a referral source or a lateral candidate, right, on the recruiting side, here's your firm name for the first time, where does that trust come from now? I think 20 years ago, trust often came just from proximity, right? Who you knew. Do I know somebody that you know, right? What building are you in, right? What street are you on? That was a huge, huge thing, especially you look at like 100 years ago, right? Did I see you at the last bar association dinner, right? I think today, and obviously the other thing back in the day was like the directories, right? There was a massive, big red book, a huge directory of phone numbers and emails of folks at respective firms and companies in different categories. And I think today, right, just with the rapid, globalization of information and how fast information travels, right? It's about making sure that we build systems of trust and credibility that travel, right, in the same way that modern media does. And I think, some general foundational principles are, one, presenting a clear point of view, two, consistent education, being known as an entity, as a brand that consistently is plugged in, is in the loop, is talking about interesting, important things and educating the community around them. Providing useful explanation of complex issues. And that's again to the relevance piece. There's hooks every single day. There's too many hooks to keep up with, right? I mean, in my very niche space, I mean, there are over 1,000 different niche areas of law, right? It's very difficult to master all of them, and it's very difficult even to master one, right? Because there's just so much going on. But identifying, the areas where a useful explanation is going to be the most valuable on a particularly complex issue that people have the most interest in, kind of pulling from your experiences is going to be the best way to start. Another principle is, the public record that you're building of competence, right? And I think increasingly, video and audio, right, that make people feel like they know you before the first call, right? I think that's one of the huge values of video. As I'll get into, throughout the presentation, the written content is not dead. It has not went anywhere, and it's as important as ever. I think video provides a different type of value. If you think about it as kind of a one-two punch, right? But video and audio are a huge opportunity to share more about who you are, be more expressive. It just comes through in a totally different way what your personality is, right? Whether you're somebody I might get along with, right? You can just tell so much more, from a video explaining potentially the same concept and potentially using the exact same language, as written content by itself, right? So, we talked a little bit about who I am with the very generous introduction, but I want to give a quick snapshot of a couple additional details about my path because I think that context matters. Before joining Gesmer in Boston, I was the assistant general counsel at Robinhood Markets, which is a large broker dealer and crypto exchange that's publicly traded. And I advise on regulatory and enforcement issues. Earlier in my career, I was at Kirkland and Ellis and at Sidley Austin. But I think probably the most interesting and helpful career stop along the way that informs much of what I will share today is that between Robinhood and joining Gesmer, I actually started my own law firm. And that was quite the endeavor. I can tell you just a tremendous amount of appreciation and respect for legal administrators and all of the professionals that contribute and collaborate to make a law firm what it is. It is very, very important and very, very helpful and very difficult to run a firm as a solo practitioner. But I would not trade that experience for anything because that experience gave me this appreciation and understanding of all of the different components, how important all of it is, and the best ways to leverage my skills and get to a point of scale, and that ultimately led me here to Gesmer. Um, but along the way, I started doing something that felt slightly weird and was certainly not as common as it is now, certainly not at the volume that I was. But I started teaching in public, right? I think that's really the best way to describe what law firms really want to do with digital content and creating digital capital is you are teaching in public, right? And for free, right? And so I started publishing a newsletter, that now reaches over 20,000 legal and financial professionals. I started the YouTube channel which, as Nick said, reaches now 160,000 subscribers. And I started to build that, not because I wanted attention, but because I I think for every person in the room in the legal industry, I think will understand that, when the stakes are high, people don't want a brochure. They want clarity from somebody that they trust, and you build that trust over time, right? It's not enough to want to be engaged on a very, very particular issue when there's really no proof of concept that you've really been talking about this, that you've been covering this over a long period of time. This digital capital that I'm talking about really provides you an opportunity to earn trust with people who maybe have not even met you, right? But with every single update, with every piece of free value that you are generously but studiously providing to the marketplace, right? Without fail, nothing's getting past you. You're covering everything. Over time, that barometer for value, that barometer for credibility starts to add up, right? Because it's like, wow, when I think about this issue, Well, I know Braden would, he had to have written something on this. He probably has a video on it, right? It becomes one of your go-to areas to find information. And when something does rise to the level of a potential engagement, or it comes up in conversation with somebody else, right? Some of the traditional methods of referrals and classic business generation then plug into that model, right? Oh, you're just top of mind. Oh, I'll introduce you to Braden. I just watched a video. He just talked about that the other day. I just read an article about that the other day, right? Um, and so I think what's important to understand that some folks from the old school often don't quickly gather, right? Because they think of this videos and articles and doing this, they think of it as this other thing, this thing that is other than what has made them successful, which is often much more driven by direct personal relationships. I know this person. I this person had a great experience with me. We worked together for many years, whatever the interaction was. And that person introduced me to this other person. And then we've developed a really great relationship. And that referral snowball happens, right? And I think when you were only relying on that, right, conferences were like the most important thing ever, right, in terms of meeting somebody new, getting in somebody's Rolodex. But I think when you think about what digital capital and digital content, the proliferation of the value of that, really what that is this just getting in front of people in a different way and providing another opportunity to spark interactions, spark curiosity, and drive new relationships. Because at the end of the day, you have to go from Braden wrote a really great article to I just wired Braden's firm $100,000, right? You have to get to that place, and it's not just the video that does that, right? Maybe it's 5 videos and 10 articles, and then a phone call, and then 6 months later, there's a trigger event that makes that person think of you, right? Or there's a trigger event for somebody else that makes a referral source think of you, right? But I think the punchline is that this is not like content for content's sake. It's been a measurable form of business value. So um, I think there's three market realities that are colliding right now. First is that discovery is predominantly digital in today's environment. So, even when a business comes through a referral, people validate referrals online. They're going to check your website. They're going to Google your name, Google your firm's name. They're going to read reviews to the extent that they're available. Although for attorneys, Google reviews aren't really the primary source that you'd look for there, but depending on the type of client, that may be where they're looking. They're going to look at rankings. They may look at your LinkedIn, and increasingly, if there's video available, they're going to watch video. Is particularly if you have video that's actually on topic for something that they're looking at. So for consumer legal services, FindLaw's 2024 U.S. Consumer Legal Needs Survey found that 82% used online reviews of some, online validation, right, in some form in the process of hiring the firm. And 97% used search engines, whether AI or Google, to find online information about the attorney or law firm that they contacted, right? So even if you got the referral, right, there's going to be that proof, that validation of that referral. Okay, my buddy John, he recommended Braden. Who is this Braden guy? Recommended Gesmer. What is Gesmer all about? Let me see what I find there. Right. And so you want the digital capital online to reinforce, right, the very generous and kind referral that you got from John, right? So also in that survey, about one in six consumers search for online videos when looking for legal help. So that's 1 in 6 right now. YouTube was the most used platform. But again, 1 in 6, you might think, oh, is that really important? Well, listen, it's 1 in 6. That's a big percentage. That if you're the only one doing it, that's a pretty good edge, right? It's a pretty good edge to have right? If 5 and 6 weren't doing it, and that's a pretty nice edge given the competition and the landscape in this environment. I would also say that video is one of the biggest hurdles because it is the hardest thing to get an older attorney to do. It's one of the hardest things to get a traditional firm with traditional gray-haired leaders to do. It's just hard. And anybody who has experience with this, you can attest to what I'm saying. It's just hard. It's a difficult thing if you've not done that before. It feels silly. Really, you want me to talk to this camera and explain some legal concepts, right? It feels a little bit awkward for some people. And for that reason, that's actually good. I think that's good for folks who are looking to identify an edge and are looking to grow and looking to find ways to enhance their digital capital and their footprint, is because there is that barrier to entry, right? I tell clients in the fintech space all the time, when they're belly aching about the costs and complexity surrounding pursuing, for example, a money transmission license or a broker-dealer license or whatever it may be. Um, you know, but the big thing is that that's a moat, right? Yes, we could try to design your business to not require this license. There may be some risks. There may be, most likely will be several, potholes that you have to avoid stepping into, that will make operation of the business a little bit more complex because there's so many things there's so many red lines where, oh, you can't cross that line, right? It's a moat, right? It's a gating exercise. When you have that set up, it actually creates a barrier to entry, and makes it very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, for a company who's similarly situated, potentially has the exact same idea and the exact same strategy, but has not got that license, or in this instance, has not really taken to, the mode of building digital capital to compete with you. It just becomes very, very difficult to do so. One example, Trump's first term in office, right? Before, when he was campaigning, he was saying, we're going to repeal Dodd-Frank, we're going to get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley, we're going to deregulate all the banks, we're going to get rid of all this stuff. And then he got elected and he had conversations with the leaders of these banks, and they were like, no, we're good. Don't do anything to the regulation. We've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build systems to comply with these regulations. We're fine with it. The floodgates will open if you deregulate all this stuff. We'll have to compete with mom and pops and the little guys, right? We're gonna have to compete with everybody if you make it that easy to compete, right? And you can say what you will about the political dynamics of whether we think that that's good or bad or whatever. It's reality, right? That moats and gates it makes things harder for folks to compete with you. And so anything that you can do that drives value, that has a little bit of a barrier to entry to it, or isn't super easy to do, start finding value in that. Not just looking at well, this is going to suck. It's going to cost some money. We're going to have to bring someone in. We don't understand this, right? Those things can actually be used to your advantage. Second, trust is strained. So Edelman's 2025 Trust Barometer shows high levels of concern that leaders purposely mislead people, right? It also shows that globally scientists and teachers are more trusted statistically than CEOs, journalists, and government leaders. So what does that mean for law firms, right? It means that promotion is expensive and education is powerful, right? Third, attention is very scarce, right? We've all read reports about, the rise in ADD and difficulties of young people being able to hold their attention, right? And the buyer's journey is being increasingly, more self-directed, right? Google Think with Google Work highlights that 92% of B2B buyers already have a short list of preferred vendors before they even start the buying process, right? So if you're not building familiarity before somebody needs you, you are fighting an uphill battle at the exact moment that you can least afford to do that, right? It's just going to be very hard to compete. So let's talk about defining what this asset is, right? And this is the definition I want you to carry back to your firm. Digital capital is the compounding asset that you build when your expertise is packaged into content that is discoverable, credible, and consistently delivered. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's really important to write down and to think about and build on. Digital capital is the compounding asset that you build when your expertise is packaged into content that is discoverable, easy to find, credible, and consistently delivered. And I think that that can be broken down into three subcomponents. One is trust, right? People believe that you are competent, the firm is competent and candid. Two, distribution, you have a reliable way to reach them, not just hope that an algorithm is kind to your firm on a given day, right? So thinking about the different platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, I think it's a brand decision whether you want to post on, for example, Instagram or Facebook. Some firms choose to, some firms choose not to, right? TikTok, right? I would generally say touch and go, touch and go. Um, I think if you're a multi-billion dollar firm, I don't. This may be surprising coming from me. I don't know that TikTok or Instagram are really worth the squeeze. I think the vast majority of value that you're going to get from digital content is can largely be gained from LinkedIn, email, right? Direct through your website, building up your website, writing blogs, and posting on LinkedIn, YouTube, right? I think those platforms likely are going to get you the best distribution in terms of bang for your buck because you don't want to confuse your audience now about kind of or dilute your brand in any way. However, if you're a really small firm and you are primarily trying to target really, really small companies or individuals, then maybe Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok start to make a lot of sense, right? But you really have to think about where is my decision maker sitting, right? If my decision maker is the head of, a $500 million hedge fund, I don't know that TikTok is really going to do it for that decision maker. Even if somehow did find you on TikTok, I don't know that that is going to be helpful in terms of endearment to that individual with respect to making a buying decision, right? So you got to think about the psychology of who your buyer is, who your client is, and figure out what are the platforms that kind of garner the type of brand respect and are synonymous with the brand and image that you're trying to put forth. Um, and third would be proof. So, a public body of work, right, that reduces perceived risk about making that hiring decision. People want to make good decisions, right? You hire a firm, you want 3 months from now or 6 months from now or a year down the line for other people to be like, that was great. You really hit it out of the park with hiring those guys. That was fantastic. This firm, that was amazing, right? That was a great decision. People want, people are selfish, right? People want the glory. People want the credit for making a good decision. And so part of this trust distribution and proof is giving that person, making it easier for that decision maker to reach the right decision, which, obviously we in good faith believe is to hire our firm or to hire us. And so if you're a CFO or COO listening, that probably sounds very familiar to you, right? It's an intangible asset like a brand, that, the difference is that you can instrument it and you can measure it. I want to do a mini audience exercise um, about areas where your firm or your company may currently be losing trust, right? And so let's take 60 seconds. I want you to write down three places or three areas that your firm has lost trust in the buying process in the past, or where kind of wheels have fallen off the tracks. potentially where you lose leads. But if you can, right, a little bit more specific would be, where are some areas where you've potentially lost trust, right? So let's take a couple seconds and then we can talk through it. If someone is brave and wants to share, then they're more than welcome to do so.
Um, I'll say we deal with a lot of outside marketing, and I think losing trust, Google reviews are
Mm,
the worst.
yep, yep. Google reviews is big. And I see, I know in IT, yeah, IT terminates a program we use every day and implements something else but doesn't tell anyone. Yep. Yeah, to the extent that you have an IT system that faces externally in some capacity, that can be big. Anything else?
I'm gonna say for
Yeah,
internal use, also Glassdoor
yeah,
again.
yep, yep. Especially for recruiting. Yep. And I would say, I have a couple, different ideas. You know, the big one that I hear is you know I think outside of what the core focus is of what I'm talking about because I'm not a web designer, but a bad website. Oh man, I mean, there's almost nothing more detrimental than a bad website, right? A website that is generic, that has typos, that the graphics are messed up, just doesn't look smooth or clean or like it was designed in the last decade, or 2 decades, right? That is really, really difficult to overcome, really difficult to overcome, and you're likely only to get a sale if you do, um, because of a very strong personal relationship, either with the core decision maker or the referral source, right? Practice descriptions that are poorly worded, right? Kind of sound like everybody else. Lawyer bios that are boring and kind of uninspiring. No proof of differentiators of kind of how your lawyers think and how your firm, uniquely approaches ideas. No recent insights, so like nothing, no recent publishing activity. Um, no video. That can be tough, in terms of just comparison firms in this environment. No voice, no humanity, really no personality. Um, if the intake process is disorganized, right? Not hearing back, feeling inconsistent or disorganized is big. Um, and so I think that's a big one. Um, at least in the modern environment, when you're looking at kind of the younger generation, I think for folks in different generations, you think about it a little bit differently, right? You may be able to look at, a lawyer's bio and be able to just say, oh, okay, they've been practicing for X amount of years. They have gray hair. Seems like they're going to be great, right? But I think younger people they really are looking for more of the proof of concept, right? Like, you know, where you ranked, what have you done, what have you said? Let me get a sample of how you think, how you make decisions, the work that you've done in this space. And it's difficult because you're trying to get to the initial conversation. You're trying to get your claws in, right? And get to that critical conversation. And so you want to be able to move that process along. Um, let's talk about ROI, and what it means in this context. Um, and it's, importantly, although potentially someone in your marketing team may tell you different, from my vantage point, ROI on this digital capital strategy is not likes or retweets or reposts, or comments, although that can drive SEO and drive the algorithm. ROI is business outcomes. What we care about is one, client engagements, right? And so when people say ROI in law firms, they usually mean, one of two things, either, show me the revenue right now, or, we can't really measure this, so let's not try. I mean, how many times does that happen, right? And both of those would be wrong, right? ROI for law firms has at least five ledgers, and I call it the 5R model. One is revenue, so matters opened, expansions, cross sells, better fit clients, higher realization. Two, reputational lift, so invitations, press, podcast requests, conference invites and keynotes, credibility in the market, right? That's measurable. That's important ROI. Recruiting and retention, so laterals, associate staff, retention rates, and staff having a trajectory and brand strength. Four, risk reduction, so like better informed clients, better fit clients, so fewer preventable blowups. If you can cut a client out of the prospective client out of that process early because it's very clear that they're not going to be a good fit, um, then you can prevent an issue from coming up later and have fewer kind of surprise misunderstandings. We all know what it's like to have a bad client, right? I've had bad clients, I've had great clients. And over time, obviously, you try to do what you can to only get engaged by the good ones, right? And then resilience, right? So when the market turns and other firms, are struggling, the firms with strong trust and distribution, they don't go silent, right? They stay top of mind. And I am going to send around some slides in the next day or so. So I know someone asked for, for these 5 Rs: revenue, reputational lift, recruiting, risk reduction, and resilience. But I will end up sending a slide deck around in the next couple days. Um, so, you don't need to pretend that every LinkedIn post equals a new engagement letter, but you do need to understand that a strong digital presence changes the probability distribution of outcomes, right? So it statistically, unequivocally increases the odds that your next best client is already warm when they arrive, right? And I think that is ROI. And it's a form of ROI that we need to become familiar with when we're evaluating these kinds of strategies. So, let's talk about why thought leadership beats marketing materials. There is a ton of research that captures something that every lawyer and most legal professionals intuitively already know, right? In the 2024 Edelman LinkedIn B2B Thought Leadership Impact Report, 73% of decision makers said thought leadership is a more trustworthy basis for assessing capabilities than marketing materials and product sheets. That's just pretty powerful. So your own thought leadership is 73% of decision makers say is way more important than your sexy marketing deck explaining how great you are, right? Show me, don't tell me, right? How many times have we heard that before? And more than 75% said that thought leadership led them to research a product or service they were not previously considering. Okay. So thought leadership is driving the decision making. Why? Because people don't like to be sold. People hate to be sold because everyone wants to be the genius. It was my idea. I was researching this. I came across this amazing thought leadership and I identified this amazing firm, this amazing lawyer, and I hired them. And I'm so smart, right? People want to be in control, right? They want to be in control. They want to be in power. They want to make decisions on their own. They don't want to be sold to, right? And this is the legal version of the same phenomenon, right? That clients don't want to be sold. They want to be educated by someone who clearly understands the risk. And that's why video and explanation are so powerful because you're able to convince someone to hire you without asking, right? You're not running ads, you're building credibility. So I want to talk about the 95 and 5 reality in the long game. So this is another concept that I find incredibly useful for law firms. the Ehrenberg Bass Institute has popularized this 95 and 5 rule, right? So at any given time, only a small fraction of buyers are in the market, and most are out of the market, not actively shopping, right? So law firms make the classic mistake of only speaking to the 5% who have an active matter this minute, an active need, an active matter right at this second, right? But digital capital, to break this down and make this really easy, digital capital is about the other 95%, right? It's about being remembered and trusted before the need becomes urgent. Because then when the moment hits, you are the shortlist form, right? So my playbook and kind of a good starting point, and then we only have a couple minutes left, and then we'll get to some Q&A. Is I didn't start with a grand strategy deck. I started with one constraint: take complex regulatory enforcement issues and make them clear enough that a smart, busy person can understand them quickly. And that is it, right? So then I built around three disciplines that any firm can replicate: a defined lane. I didn't talk about everything. I do not talk about everything. You will go nuts and you will have no credibility. It will actually work against you. I talked about the intersection that I live in, right? And two would be consistency. You gotta be consistent, and the algorithms track this. They track this. Consistency is huge algorithmically and, just in reality from a human interaction perspective. And then third is point of view, right? What's the point of view? What's the perspective that you're bringing, right? Is it a hot take, right? Is that something? Probably not for, established law firms. We don't want too many hot takes, but we want to provide real judgment, what matters and what does not, right? And so, I think you should treat it just like a lawyer practicing law. Outline, edit, use sources. Don't make careless claims. Make it professional. Make it useful, and that's what scales trust. With that, I have a couple more interesting things that I wasn't able to get to. The 45 minutes really flew by, but I do have a deck that I'll put together and make sure it's distributed. But I'll pause here for any questions, um, or comments or ideas that anybody wants to raise.
I do have one question for you. What
Yeah.
has been your most viral video that you've done?
Mm. Um, there's two. There's one that was a short that was and it was very short. I mean, I think it was like 30 seconds. And it was funny. It was a funny one. Um, that it's one of those things that you kind of experiment with different things. Going viral doesn't always lead to ROI. But I think you need to experiment and take risks and figure out what works and what doesn't, what ends up being kind of synonymous with the brand that you want to have and what doesn't. It was a funny video that was talking about what to do if you get a subpoena. And essentially we were saying, don't light documents on fire, don't destroy documents. And I had the example of someone lighting a document on fire, right? And it was just like, you should organize documents, take a deep breath, you should call a lawyer, you should figure out how to organize and prepare and strategize. You shouldn't, so it's just like kind of a funny sort of video that got a lot of interest. I think it got, over 500,000, maybe 600,000 views. And then another really big one was a podcast that I did with the founder of the Securities Docket, Bruce Carton. And we talked about a lot of interesting things, AI and scaling my firm, some of these issues that we're talking about right now, and I think that did 300 or 400,000 views as well. But you never know. The most important thing I would tell everybody, it's not, don't think about the thing that's going to go viral. That's a marketing idea. From a legal perspective, pay it no mind. What I've learned, you just need to be consistent. You need to have a clear roadmap for how you choose issues that are worth talking about, and that should be driven by your experience, your skills, and what you believe as a lawyer. And like if or if you're a legal professional, you're talking about something else. It's something that you have a lot of personal understanding and credibility about talking about, and it speaks to you. It rose to your level of I want to talk about this, right? And if you follow that over time, you will just be surprised. That's just a guarantee what's going to happen. You're going to be surprised what video, what article ultimately leads clients to you. I have been shocked by what articles and what videos ended up generating client business, and oftentimes the ones that get the highest amount of views, they're not always the ones that drive revenue. You just don't know. Obviously, right? It's a percentage game, you would think, but it's very difficult to game that system. And so my advice is just, do it with credibility, do it with, your core experience and intuition, um, you know, at the forefront of everything, just making content that you care about and that you believe in and you stand behind. And everything else take care of itself. So long as you're consistent, though, you will find your people, you will find your clients, and your clients will find you.